This is the Natural History Museum. Welcome to NHM Live.
In a couple of minutes, you'll be meeting one of our scientists.
This is your chance to ask some questions directly.
We look forward to hearing from you. Let's find out who our scientist is today.
My name's Duncan Sivell and I work as a curator of flies at the Natural History Museum in London. I've been studying flies for 20 years now, and that came about through biodiversity work, and I joined the museum 5 years ago. Flies are one of the most diverse groups of animals on the planet. 1 in 10 species that have been described is a fly. We have 2.5 million fly specimens in the museum, and part of my role as a curator is to ensure that these specimens are preserved correctly, catalogued correctly, and are made available to other scientists so they can carry out their research. Flies have a complete metamorphosis, which also means that the juvenile stages, typically what we refer to as maggots, can have a completely different lifestyle to the adults, and that makes the diversity of ecology much greater. Flies have an amazing range of life histories in ecology, which is what fascinates me about the group.
Hello everyone, welcome to NHM Live here at the Natural History Museum in London. My name is Camilla and I'll be your host for today's show, and today we're talking all about the weird and wonderful world of flies. Just to remind you, this is a live broadcast, so if you've got any questions at any point in time, please don't be shy, send them on through and we'll get through as many of your questions as possible during the course of the show. Now, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Duncan Sivell here today. He is a resident entomologist here at the museum, which means he's very interested in insects and in particular flies. So Duncan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So before we get stuck in and look at all these beautiful specimens, I have to ask you why flies? Because these are insects that people might tend to find quite annoying. You know, they fly in our faces, they land on our food. What is it about them that you find so interesting?
Well, I started studying flies after I was doing some biodiversity work, where I was looking at butterflies and dragonflies. Now, they're both quite small groups, so for biodiversity I wanted to look at a larger group of insects, and it was actually accidental that it was flies, because I went to volunteer at my local record centre, and they just happened to have a stockpile of crane flies that they wanted someone to identify, so it was it was not planned that it was flies, but I've stuck with flies for 20 years now, just because the more I look at them, the more fascinating they are.
Well, there you go. You never know where volunteering can take you.
That's true, yes. Yeah.
So you said you wanted to work on a bigger group, so flies are obviously very diverse. How many known species of fly are there in the world?
Well, we've described 160,000 species. We just don't know how many species there are, but we think that might be about a fifth of the number of species out there. So there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of species to describe. We know that. Exactly how many there are, it will take us a while to find out.
So we're discovering new species all the time?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. Now, you've brought along this straw here, which kind of represents the diversity of flies.
Yes.
I wonder if we could take a quick look through it. Maybe you could point out some interesting specimens.
Yes, well, in the top middle here, we've got quite a large crane fly. People will recognise this. This is a large specimen from China, but the body shape people will be familiar with. We have about 75 large crane flies in Britain, so they're quite a big group. Yeah. And these are thought to be one of the more primitive groups as well. But if we look across, then there's another large specimen over here, which
That's fairly intimidating.
Yes, it is. This is South American. It's called a pentaphthalmid, and it lays its eggs in tree trunks, so the larvae develop in a dead wood, a bit like a stag beetle would. But okay. The pointy feature at the end of the abdomen is the ovipositor, so that might look dangerous, it might look like a sting, but that's completely harmless.
So what is an ovipositor, just to be clear?
Yeah, an ovipositor is an egg-laying tube.
Okay.
So it's just so they can extend it so they can get their eggs into crevices.
Excellent. And I was looking at this specimen here, which has a really kind of long, thin structure coming off of the head. Is that a mouth part?
Yes, that's the proboscis. So this belongs to the family we know as horseflies, and people will think of horseflies as biting. They usually have quite short mouth parts, the biting ones. So this really long proboscis will be for feeding on nectar that's in long tubed flowers. So
I see.
you need the long proboscis to get all the way down the tube.
And this specimen here might be familiar to some people as well. That's looking like a really lovely mimic of a bee or a wasp.
Yes, this one here, that's known as a hornet hoverfly. This is quite a common species in Britain now. It's expanding its range as well. There seems to be a reasonable relationship with climate with the expansion. And as you can see, it's yellow, black, brown. You might think it's a wasp from a distance, and that's mimicry to give it some extra protection.
Yeah, it's pretty convincing in my eyes.
Yeah.
So you've also brought along a couple of examples of some of the world's smallest and some of the world's largest flies. Can we take a look at that?
Yes, we do. If we look at the other drawer, again we have, you can see we have a large crane fly here again, and we also have one of the pentathalmids again. But next to the crane fly, you can see there's a square of plastic on that pin.
I can see a speck, a pinhead and a speck.
Well, there's a pin through the plastic, and there's an even smaller pin, a micro pin, through the plastic as well, with a very small fly on it. That's a Highland midge.
Right.
So we've gone from China and South America back to Britain. It's not the smallest species. We don't have the smallest species in the museum, unfortunately. That's been found in Thailand, and it's 0.4 millimeters long, so you can get grains of salt that are bigger than this fly, the smallest fly.
Very easy to accidentally inhale, I can imagine.
Yes, probably.
Okay, so absolutely minuscule. And can we look at some of the world's biggest flies too?
Yes, so we've already seen a couple of large species, but if you want to see the biggest, this is the species people usually refer to.
Wow.
So this is Gauramidus heros, and it's South American, and you can see the size of it. It's very impressive. And these lay their eggs in the nests of leafcutter ants. So it would seem that the larvae probably develop inside an ant's nest in the rainforest, and they probably feed on the brood.
Okay.
Is what we think.
Have you ever had one of these hurtling towards you in the field?
No, I've never been to South America, so
Okay.
I've never come across these.
Okay, so it's probably fair to say that part of flies' global success is probably because their larvae have adapted to thrive in some really unique niche environments.
Yes,
So I'd love to
yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah.
Under the visualizer, we've got another very small specimen. I can pop my finger on just to give you an idea about just how small it is. Now this fly, it's absolutely tiny. That lays its egg on cheese. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It actually lays its eggs on quite a lot of things. So this is quite a Catholic species in terms of breeding sites. But in Sardinia, they have a cheese which is a speciality called casu marzu, and they make the precursor to the cheese, and then they leave it out so that the flies in this particular species will infect it and lay eggs on it. And then the larvae, the maggots, they crawl through the cheese, eating what they originally make, and producing this like secondary cheese, if you like, casu marzu, which is a speciality and a delicacy in Sardinia.
Have you tried it?
I have tried it. I met a Sardinian in London who had some, and he let me taste some. The maggots were all dead by this point.
Sometimes they're still alive.
Yes. So you can eat it with the maggot still on it.
Right.
Which, and there's a possible danger there because this fly is so well adapted to different environments. The larvae can live inside your stomach sometimes. They can survive in your stomach. So eating this with the maggots on can be potentially dangerous. But the one I tasted, it had no maggots on it at all, so I was fine.
Okay, I'm an avid cheese lover, but I might leave that one behind.
Yes.
So what's this specimen here in this glass jar here?
Yes, well, here we have another example of how adapted larvae are to different environments. So this is part of a cowhide, and if we turn this round, we can see that on the back, underneath the skin, are a series of larvae feeding away there. So this is a botfly, and this species is now extinct in Britain because we've controlled for this species. It's still, you still find it on the continent, so it's not gone extinct globally. But the adult flies, which look a bit like a bumblebee, they've got some mimicry going on. They lay their eggs on the cow, the eggs hatch, and they will burrow into, the larvae will burrow into the skin and then develop. And the larvae feed more on the irritation, the mucus, the bacteria that results from them being there. They're feeding more on that than on the actual cow itself.
How much harm does it cause to the cow? Is it just like a minor irritation, or is it quite severe?
It's difficult to know. I think it would certainly be irritating. You get this in a range of different animals, and people can get things similar in the tropics, and I've found mice that have maggots, large maggots in them as well. So in certain circumstances it can look quite uncomfortable.
And what happens when the larva is ready to pupate and emerge as an adult? How does it escape from under the skin?
Well, it'll work its way out. There'll be a breathing hole, and it will work its way out of the breathing hole and then drop to the ground. So once it's large enough that it wants to pupate, it doesn't have to feed anymore. So it doesn't have to be in the cow or the other host. And they often burrow just into the soil surface, pupate, and then the adult fly will come out a while later.
Excellent. Okay, there's one more specimen which I'd like to put under the visualizer so we can just show people here. Now this is an adult version of the fly and also lays its eggs in a rather unusual place.
Yes, well, this is the rhinoceros botfly. So it does more or less the same thing as we've just described in the for the cowhide, but it will lay its eggs on the face of a rhinoceros, and then the larvae that hatch can crawl inside the nostrils and the mouth and work their way inside the gut. So this actually, the larvae actually live inside the stomach of the rhinoceros.
Right.
So it's a slightly different strategy.
And again, I suppose when it's ready to emerge as an adult, there's only one way to be passed out there.
Yes, they can just let go and pass through.
Not terribly glamorous.
Yeah.
So thanks very much, Duncan. We're going to come back to some more specimens in just a couple of minutes. Earlier on this week, I caught up with another one of our museum scientists, Dr. Martin Hall, to look at some flies that also lay their eggs in a very specific place. Martin, you've worked alongside police forces on numerous occasions as a forensic entomologist. What exactly is that?
Well, a forensic entomologist is someone who basically uses insects that are found at a crime scene to help in the investigation of that crime. And the way in which I'm used most regularly is to investigate homicide and suicides, basically by trying to work out how long someone's been dead.
So you work specifically with flies. How can flies and maggots tell us how long a body has been dead?
Well, the gold standard forensic indicator I use is this species here. It's a blue bottle blowfly, Calliphora vicina, common to most people, you know, in your kitchen when you're preparing meat. These things will come in during the summer. The females are attracted by the odours of decomposition and can arrive within 24 hours or less. In fact, sometimes within just 2 or 3 hours of death.
How do they find the body? Can they smell it?
Basically, they can smell it. In fact, these flies are very curious. If you're out in the garden having a barbecue, you know, they're flying around and you brush them away while you're still alive. But if you die, you can't do that, and they will investigate your body. And if they are ready to lay their eggs, they will find an ideal spot on you and lay their eggs. And that gets us into the beginning of the life cycle.
Okay, so talk us through the life cycle of a fly and how this relates to different periods of time.
Right, well basically the females will lay their eggs and those eggs hatch out into larvae, and the larvae are very ravenous. They'll start feeding and in the summer they'll feed for about 5 to 7 days, and then when they finish feeding they'll disperse away and they then turn into the next stage, which is equivalent to the chrysalis of a butterfly. It's called the puparium, and in that stage they basically change from a maggot into a fly, which then emerges, and so the life cycle carries on.
So why is the temperature such an important piece of information to know?
Basically, flies are poikilothermic, that's cold-blooded, so unlike us they can't regulate their temperature, and they grow at a rate that's dependent on temperature. So the hotter it is, the quicker they develop. So counterintuitively in a way, in the summer you can use this technique over a few weeks, and in the winter when it's colder you can apply it over several months. But basically, as I say, the eggs when they hatch they turn into small larvae, not much more than the size of a grain of rice, and within 24 hours or so they've grown to this size here, and then within about 5 days they're mature larvae like these ones in this tube here. And say the temperature is so important. You might think when you look at these larvae in this tube here, you've got big ones, small ones. Well, the small ones are obviously younger, but actually they're not. These larvae here have just grown at different temperatures. They're both 48 hours, 2 days old. The bigger ones grew at 26 degrees, and the small ones at 21 degrees. So you can see it's really important for us at a crime scene to work out what the ambient temperatures were in order for us to work out how old the insects are.
Wow, that's amazing that these larval stages can tell us so much about the specific time periods. You mentioned that final stage before it emerges as an adult in the puparium that we obviously can't see inside, and that can last up to 10 days. So when you find a puparium, is it not difficult to know whether it's 1 day old or 10 days old? How do you know?
So it's a good question. We've got some puparia here which are in all different colours. The white ones have literally just pupariated within about an hour to 2 hours, and then they get darker and darker. So you can see some external ageing characters over the first 8 hours or so, but thereafter they just remain as these dark shells, rugby ball shaped things, and you can't see what's going on. You can of course dissect them, but even then, the understanding of their age is a bit limited, and of course you destroy it by dissecting it, and it's forensic evidence, so it's good to be as non-invasive as possible. So what we do at the museum is take them down to our micro-CT scanner, and we've scanned them at 10% intervals through their life cycle, and when we're working at a temperature where they take about 10 days, that's every day basically, and with the micro-CT scanner, just as in a hospital, you can look inside a person and see how their organs are going. You can look inside the puparium and see how the organs are developing. And some of these, I mean, we look at qualitative changes, but we also can get quantitative information. We can measure the volume, for example, of the flight muscles. They grow enormously in the latter stages of development. And we're just beginning to now look inside the brain of the puparium as it develops. And with our new micro-CT, it has amazing resolution, and you can actually see and measure changes that are going on there in the brain.
To what degree of accuracy then can you tell the police about how long a body has been deceased?
Well, the sort of research we do here at the museum is rearing these flies at set temperatures up in our insectary, and using all of the data that we gather from that and data from other laboratories around the world, we can actually put together a picture for police where we can determine the minimum time someone's been dead with an accuracy of about a day during the summer, maybe even more accurate than that, so that the flies found the body in the morning rather than in the afternoon. And this obviously can help the police focus their investigations in a certain sort of time frame.
Hi everyone, welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us now, I'm here with one of our resident entomologists, Duncan Sivell, and we're talking all about flies today. So Duncan, we've had a couple of online questions in the past few minutes. So Gavin on Facebook would like to know, why do crane fly legs fall off so easily? That's a very valid question.
Yes, and they do, and they're designed to fall off easily, so it's a defensive response. And if you're trying to catch a crane fly, which when you're studying them is often the case, you have to grab them by the wing. If you grab them by the legs, you just end up with legs, but it's a defense mechanism, so they're meant to do that.
So they can survive quite happily missing a couple of legs?
Yes, and adult crane flies tend not to live too long anyway, so their lifespan, they spend much more time as a larva or a maggot than as an adult, so the adult is more expendable part of the life stage.
I see, okay. Great question, thank you very much, Gavin. Another question from Adam on Facebook. What would happen if the cheese maggots stay alive inside you?
See a doctor. I think that's a simple question. I mean, they would cause irritation. They would be trying to take nutrients from you or from your food. Yes, it wouldn't be good for you. So
there's only one way to find out, Duncan. I think maybe you should give it a go. Maybe.
No.
Fiona on Facebook how many flies have some sort of parasitic part of their life cycle?
Quite a few, actually. So in Britain there's a family of flies called parasitic flies, and they tend to parasitize caterpillars and weevils. We have a couple of hundred species, and if you think about some other groups as well, we maybe have in the region of maybe 300 odd species or more in Britain that are parasitic. That's out of a total of 7,000. So we have 7,000 flies in Britain, but I guess we have at least 300 species that are parasitic in this country.
Quite a few.
Quite a few, yeah.
We've had another question from Periscope. How can you eat flies or cook them?
I would say probably eat the maggots rather than the adults, I would think. You can fry them. There are different ways of cooking them. Some companies now they're rearing larvae and then grinding those into protein powder. Mm-hmm. So there is a market for this, and there's already a small industry for the pet trade, but now we're looking at putting this in the human food chain as well. So excellent. Yeah,
good way to get your protein fix.
Yes. Yeah.
And we have another question on Periscope from Mark Gregory. He says, how many flies in the rainforest don't we know about yet?
That's really difficult to say, but it's so if you're in the rainforest, if you caught a sample of flies, you would probably guess that 80% of them are unknown.
Oh wow, okay.
That's the kind of scale of the difference between what we know and what we don't know. So we think we know 20% of what's out there.
So lots more work to do. Lots more reasons for you to go out to the rainforest.
Yes.
So Duncan, I'd like to talk a little bit about predatory flies, because I think when we think about flies, we just think of them as passively sort of landing on our summer picnic food, but we don't really think of them as active predators.
Yeah.
And you've got some great specimens in this drawer in front of us. Can you tell us about these?
Yes, well, in this drawer we have some robber flies, and down in the corner here we've got 2 flies and a cricket as well. And this is quite unusual because this cricket was found being carried by both these adult flies, which are predatory flies. Flies don't normally cooperate like that, so it's a bit of a puzzle why 2 of them were carrying this cricket. It might be that one was trying and couldn't do it by itself, and the other one was trying to steal it. It's unclear. It's unclear, but this is a good example of predatory species, and you can see how large they are as well.
Yes.
These are South American.
And they're clearly happy to go for prey insects that are a fair amount bigger than themselves.
Yes, that's not necessarily uncommon. Yeah.
And do predatory flies like robber flies and dance flies, do they have special adaptations in their anatomy that makes them effective hunters?
Well, they're very good flyers. They're very quick. Robber flies typically have a beard as well, and that's because when they're catching other prey items, then the prey item struggles. So they often have a beard around the face to protect them, protect their face. Some flies also have rows of spines along their forelegs to help them catch and grab the insects as they catch them flying along. Oh, nice. So there are a few adaptations there.
Okay. We've had a question on Periscope. Do we need flies in our environment?
Definitely.
It's a good question.
The flies have adapted a wide range of behaviours, lifestyles. They pollinate, they help recycle nutrients in the soil, and if you think about carcasses and dung, they degrade those as well, recycle them. So the flies do a lot of good in the environment in terms of recycling nutrients and pollinating plants.
There'd be a lot more mess around without them.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So you mentioned pollination, and we've got another specimen under the visualizer here. So bees tend to get a lot of the attention, don't they, when we talk about pollination?
Yes, they do.
How much would you say we actually owe to flies, though, on that front?
Well, there have been some studies done in farms in Britain which have shown that 2/3 of the pollination is done by flies rather than bees. So bees are important, but by a simple fact of numbers of species, we have 250 species of bee, we have 7,000 species of fly.
Right.
Now, not all those flies pollinate, but a large proportion of them can. So bees are probably more efficient individually as a pollinator, but we have a lot of flies that are picking up pollen. The specimen you just looked at as well, that's quite, it's a hoverfly. Quite a few hoverflies are a little bit hairy, that picks up the pollen.
Mm-hmm.
So they do a lot of transfer, pollen transfer.
And can you give us any examples of some food, some crops or some food that flies help, where flies help pollinate that plant?
Yes, well, some are mangoes, black pepper, fennel, but the really important one is cocoa. So cocoa trees are pollinated by very small midges, like we saw earlier in the start of the programme. So we wouldn't have chocolate if we didn't have flies, very small flies.
Very important to remember.
Yes. Yeah.
So we've had another question on Periscope. How are insect motor systems different to mammals?
Well, the skeleton is on the outside, which is the obvious difference. So leverage is different. There may be a bit more hydraulics, I think, in insects than in. But that's a bit out of my comfort zone. But I'd say the basis is mammals have an internal skeleton with the muscles around it, and the tendons, and insects have it the reverse way around.
Right.
But that's not quite my area. So.
And they're certainly very quick to react, aren't they? I think.
Oh yes, they can be very quick. And when insects fly as well, it's like an automatic process, because the wing beats are so quick that they're faster than nerve pulses.
Wow.
So it goes on like an automatic system where the muscles, the two sets of flight muscles work in opposition to each other, and just automatically, because nerves couldn't do it.
Wow.
Nerve pulses would be too slow.
That's why they're so hard to swat. Why would you want to swat a fly?
Yeah.
So there's another question from Victor on Facebook. What's the major danger, if any, that flies could represent to humans?
Well, I suppose the main danger would be disease transmission, and this is an issue in the tropics mostly. It's not an issue in this country, but yes, malaria in particular, dengue fever. There are still quite a lot of diseases out there affecting a large number of people, and flies are the vectors. And more recently in this country, we've had issues with blue tongue disease, which is transmitted by small midges, and this is a disease that's spread from northern Africa, southern Europe, up through Europe, and has crossed the Channel into Britain. So that affects livestock. So there's a problem there, but there are people monitoring these flies and trying to do something about it.
I think, yeah, it's very difficult to think of many positives around mosquitoes, but as a kind of final statement, I mean, you're one of many people here at the museum who's very passionate about flies and find them completely fascinating. What would you say to people to encourage them to, give flies a chance? Yeah,
I would say just, if you start to stop and look at flies, then you'll see the advantages they bring, the diversity they have.
The chocolate they bring?
The chocolate, yes. Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Duncan.
Okay.
We are just about out of time now, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for asking your questions. Duncan is very kindly going to hang around for a few minutes after the end of the show, so if you have any further questions that you didn't have a chance to ask, please do send them through and we will try to answer. Well, I say you will try to answer as many as possible. Thanks very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again with the next episode of NHM Live.